Do you know what your dad thought of working with Dusty as a booker? I mean, not as Dusty as a talent, but I know that, obviously you guys go your separate ways as far as the Crockett's and the Jarretts because they're going to come back in Memphis I guess it's July of '86, and they're going to run the Liberty Bowl for a Great American Bash Tour, and they bomb. Depending on who you believe, in a giant football stadium, there's only between like 1,000 and 1,900 folks, and we also know that Jerry Lawler, for whatever reason, was not a huge fan of his matches with Ric Flair. Not a minute of those, not a second of that ever aired on Memphis TV. It just felt like oil and water. And I'm wondering, do you think that was the two Jerrys not getting along with Dusty, or is it the two Jerrys not getting along with the Crockett's?
Oh, probably a mixture of all the above. But look, this is wisdom and experience teaching, and also just firsthand comments. My dad really respected Dusty's creative ability. I think in a lot of ways, my dad prided himself on first and foremost the bottom line. What kind of money is it going to make? The next thing would be, connecting with the audience emotionally in a innovative way, a new way, if that makes sense. A lot of respect from the creative side and the talent side, but we're talking about creative side right here. But I'm going to kind of, and I don't want to call it old school mentality because it's just what they were used to is that, look, if I'm going to promote a show in Nashville or Lexington or Memphis, we're going to do it my way. It's my town. And that was kind of a little bit of ruffling of feathers, because I can remember the conversations, maybe not specifically this week that we're talking about back then, but over a period of my first year really in the business, was at the end of the day, big shows are really difficult because what are we going to do? Have a night of bunch of non-finishes because nobody wants to lose, and there's kind of a justifiable set of circumstances why a talent from wherever it may be is going to come in and do the honors, and he'll not be here the next week. Well, what good does that do him, not just in the local town, but nationally? Oh, for example, Dusty Rhodes came to Memphis, got his ass beat, and got beat. That doesn't, that it's just difficult. So putting all of this under kind of one big umbrella, and looking at Vince, I'll call it, across the pond or across the fence on his side, they all work for him. So winning and losing didn't matter. It was one boss. Those co-promotions, then you kind of get into the politics and all that. And he was always very aware of how are we really gonna get through this, because he's a 52 a week year promoter. And okay, so we have a magnificent, great big house. There's always going to be a letdown. How are you going to follow this the following week? So I'm going to say he respected Dusty's creative ability. And when the Crockett's were, because he had a ton of respect for the senior Crockett. And to the day my dad passed away, always just would smile when he would talk about him, how smart he was, how honorable he was. But when you talk about promoters coming into your old territory, my dad still looked at that. Okay, y'all going to come run Memphis against us. We're going to do what we got to do to protect it. So he didn't have so many fond words for them back in the 80s when they were running opposition. That's how he looked at it. He looked at it, and it, I'll say hurt him, but it pissed him off more than Vince McMahon made it clear. I'm doing this. I'm going to take all your talent. I'm going to come in and try to buy your TV. If you don't like it, screw it. This is what I'm doing. One year they're co-promoting with the Crockett's. The following year, they're running opposition. So there was a different mindset.
We know that 1987 is going to be a crazy pivotal year for all of wrestling. WrestleMania 3 just creates a boom for the World Wrestling Federation, and their arena business blows up. A lot of the territory dollars start to dry up. Crockett runs way in the red and winds up selling out in 88. But one of their last stands, if you will, the Crockett's ran one final opposition show, if you will, and it's Dusty in a headline position on March 5th, 1987. So this is not too terribly long, just a few weeks before WrestleMania 3. And we're going to have a match here in Memphis and I can't believe this is real, Dusty versus Bill Dundee to crown a new king of Tennessee. This is clearly a shot at your dad's promotion and Jerry Lawler. Bill Dundee, the longest, most bitter rival, most storied rivalry in Memphis history, maybe, between Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee. Now Bill Dundee beats Dusty Rhodes. So as far as Crockett programming goes, he's the new king of Tennessee. This does around 2,500 fans, according to Dave Meltzer, which is surprising and disappointing, Meltzer says, since the card had Jimmy Valiant, Dutch Mantell, Morton and Gibson. So many classic Memphis stars are loaded up here because they work for Crockett now. But the gate is a pretty abysmal $21,500. Is there any chance you remember this? Bill Dundee coming to town running opposition with Dusty against your dad? My God.
Well, and that the legitimate heat between Lawler and Dundee was obviously prevalent. Legitimate, well, and that was personal. Business heat would be between the Crockett's and the Jarretts. And, you know, at one point, Harley Race wanted to call himself, or did call himself, the king of wrestling, which Lawler took offense to. But the king of Memphis, and I can remember, man, I'd love to go back and have the ability. Boy, we ought to ask Lawler, Connie, because obviously my father and Dusty have passed on. But it was almost silly in a way that at this point, Lawler had been the king of Memphis for years. And it was, yes, it's a direct shot. But I think when you do the story behind the story, and by 87, Dundee had been to Kansas City. You know, he left. He'd done the Watts, and then he came back. But, you know, he'd been to Kansas City. They rolled up the sleeves. Watts had rolled up. By this point, Dallas was not in good shape. Florida was rolled up their sidewalks. You know, all the territory. And so from a business perspective, my best recollection would be is that, for lack of a better word, the Crockett's in their footprint on America, they were desperate to generate revenue in some ways. And so in their mind, hey, let's go into Memphis. We'll draw a house in there. And the Great American Bash in the Liberty Bowl, even if it was 2000, which I think it's debatable, but let's say 2000, the football stadium holds 60, 50, 60, 70. It was, just imagine that, just horrible. And then this show we're talking about, and I can remember the lesson and whether Lawler and my dad were gloating or talking serious, or it's car talk driving back from, boy, I could get on a soapbox now that just sitting under a learning tree, being in a car for 3 hours and hearing wrestling talk could do so many guys a lot of good. But the fact was that even back in this era, that Dundee, yeah, he drew a lot of money in Memphis, and Dusty drew money all over the world, and blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, they weren't on Channel 5 TV. They weren't on there, and that's the vehicle. And the people in 1987 were still super connected emotionally to Channel 5 wrestling, if you will, in Memphis. And so that TBS show, and I know they had syndication in Memphis on different U channels and stuff like that. It just didn't get the job done. And the people of Memphis looked at Dutch and the rock and roll and all those guys. If you're coming to Memphis and you're not on Channel 5 TV, it must not be that important, because those shows, they were abysmal. I mean, they bombed.